All right, welcome to Passage 2, Test 4 of the ACT English. Let's just get to the passage. It's called Working at the Bait and Tackle Shop. And it's just about this guy or a pretty young guy who has this job at this bait and fishing type of shop, and he just kind of goes about describing what that experience is like for him. So let's get to the first question. 16 says, the shop opens at 6 in the morning, I arrive 30 minutes early to set up. All right. What sticks out, the first thing, is that you need some kind of conjunction for this to work. Why? Because you have a subject and then you have a verb, and then you have a new subject and a new verb, and that makes two independent clauses, which you need to make separate with either proper punctuation, like a period or a semicolon, or punctuation and a conjunction like the comma and in this case, because it doesn't, it creates this comma splice where you're just connecting two independent clauses together. So this is a run-on sentence, so this does not work. F would not work. What about however? The shop opens at 6 in the morning. I arrive 30 minutes early to set up. Well, G would not work because you have two independent clauses here. But whenever you put however into a sentence, first of all, you need to separate however with commas on both sides. And the other thing is, is that however is not a conjunction that can separate two independent clauses. It can only serve as some kind of contrast adverb for the whole sentence. So in this case, however would not work. What about morning but? The shop opens at 6 in the morning, but I arrive 30 minutes early to set up. That's fine, because but can hold its own as a word similar to and in terms of its ability to keep two independent clauses together in the same grammatical single sentence. So but works. What about J? The shop opens at 6 in the morning. I arrive 30 minutes early to set up. Okay, so this doesn't even bother. Let's just get rid of the comma and then just make it even more of a run-on sentence. So this is certainly even more of a run-on sentence because it doesn't even have the comma and the conjunction. It just says, let's forget about both and let's see if no one notices. So J would not be right. H, morning, but, and obviously I wrote in the beginning. That grammatically makes sense. It could, because if you're at 30 minutes early, it sort of makes sense because if you start at 6, you don't get to the office right at 6 o'clock, right? You get a little early, but and or but, either one would work, and in this case, but is the only one that grammatically could work. What about 17? Which of the following alternatives to the underlined portion would be least acceptable? Least acceptable meaning which one just doesn't work at all. All right. It is adorned with peach and melon colored ribbons as a blazing solar sun begins to peek over the horizon. That could work. On many mornings, the sky looks like this as a blazing solar sun begins to peek over the horizon. The first part before the as is just describing what the sky looks like. The second part describes how the sun is coming up as he's setting up the shop. Sure. At the same time that could also work. It's saying the sky looks like this while the sun looks like that. Sure, that could work. What about B? Ribbons in order that. Oh, okay, this is a little different. In order that means so that, okay? Does the sky look like this so that the sun can peek over the horizon? As in, if the sky didn't look like this, the sun wouldn't be able to peek over the horizon? Like the sun needs the sky to look like that before the sun begins to rise? Well, that doesn't make sense. So B is definitely wrong, but let's see if there's anything else that's more wrong. So it doesn't really seem like that's possible at this point. C, ribbons while. While is the same thing as at the same time that. So while is saying this is happening while that's happening. So that works, and then you have D, ribbons, comma, and. This just makes it changes the as or at the same time that while. It changes that simultaneously sort of phrasing to comma and, meaning it just separates the two independent clauses. So it's like saying the sky looks like this, comma, and the sun looks like that. So that grammatically also works. The only one that just doesn't work at all logically is B, ribbons in order that. Let's look at B, 18. Which choice would be most consistent with the figurative description provided elsewhere in this sentence? A blazing solar sun. Well, what's the other figurative description? If you notice, it says peach and melon colored. Okay, so fruits. This person likes to write about fruity descriptions. A blazing solar sun. If you could change solar to something else, what could you change it to that would be consistent with that? Luminous, radiant. They're both very similar. It's just so radiant, so luminous. Very has to do with a lot of light or shining. Orange is the only one that has to do with a fruit. And certainly the only one that even has to do with any kind of color like that does. So orange would work, J. And solar again wouldn't work for the same reasons that luminous and radiant. It's not really consistent with the other descriptive words in the sentence. 19 says, walking toward the docks, the seagulls are wheeling and swooping. Period. Their high-pitched cries. Okay, well, there's nothing wrong with their high-pitched cries, that part. The problem here is that you have this misplaced modifier. We're walking towards the docks. That's supposed to modify what comes right after. Are the seagulls walking toward the docks? Yes, seagulls are capable of walking toward the docks, but what is the author probably trying to say? The author's probably trying to say that the narrator is walking towards the docks, right? Not the seagulls. So this doesn't make sense logically. There's a misplaced modifier issue. B, watching the seagulls wheel and swoop there. So walking toward the docks and then watching the seagulls wheel and swoop. Well, I guess that could work. You have two modifiers on top of each other. But then after, what certainly needs to happen is the word I. I was walking toward the docks. I was watching the seagulls wheel and swoop. But what follows is their what? Their cry, their high-pitched cries. Are their cries walking? No. So that's another misplaced modifier issue. What about C? I watched the seagulls wheel and swoop. Does that fix it? Walking toward the docks, I watch the eagles wheel and swoop. That makes sense. And then you say their high-pitched cries. Sure, that works. What about D? You have the same misplaced modifier walking toward the docks, the seagulls. The seagulls wheel and swoop. Misplaced modifier, misplaced modifier, misplaced modifier, properly placed modifier. So C is the correct answer. All right, on to question 20. If you see 20, it says, usually as I'm opening the door, Carney, the night security guard at the marina, walks by on his way home and offers me a sleepy hello. All right. If you read this sentence, if you think about it logically, what this is saying is Carney, who is the subject, walks by, which is the verb. And this part in the middle, this underlined portion, aside from the Carney, is basically just a big modifying clause. Meaning this is an interrupting noun clause or noun phrase that serves as an appositive or big adjective phrase to modify Carney. So who is Carney? Oh, he's the night security guard at the marina. And when you have situations like this, they interrupt the sentence. That's why they're called interrupting modifiers. So you need to separate it with the commas that are there in the sentence. So that's perfectly done. You could use dashes if you want. If you could use parentheses. But again, you need it on both sides, because if you only have it on one side, it's like having a parentheses without a closed parentheses. And so that wouldn't work. So F seems to work. G and H, the problem is here is that they have the commas on one side. And it certainly splits up the sentence where you'll have a subject separated from the verb in both cases. And it just grammatically no longer works. It no longer makes sense. And then if you say J, Carney, the night security guard at the marina, they just basically are like, oh, well, let's just forget the commas entirely. And yes, it's a modifier, but because they don't have any commas, grammatically everything gets jumbled up, the subjects get jumbled up, and the sentence no longer grammatically works. You need those commas there between, after Carney, after Marina, to set aside this modifying phrase, this big clause, as just an extra detail for the sentence, or in this specific case for Carney. And so F is the only one that does that properly. 21. All right, 21 says, the shop smells salty, like the bay itself, and the creaky oak floor is gritty with sand. Okay, well, what is the sentence saying if you think about it? Like the bay, it's supposed to be, the shop smells salty like the bay itself. The shop smells salty like the bay does, like the ocean does. So like the bay itself, there should be no comma after bay, okay? Just like saying, if any type of reflexive pronoun, like itself, myself, himself, herself, if you ever use that in a way that emphasizes the noun, so if I say, I myself love chocolate, well, I don't say I, comma, myself, comma. I just say I myself, and the myself serves to reinforce how much I love chocolate, okay? In this case, the shop smells like the bay itself. It totally smells like the ocean. Oh, it's amazing. That's what they're trying to say. And then they have this comma here, the shop smells salty like the bay itself. So this is saying that this comparison, this analogy, like the bay itself, it should be separated. It's a descriptive clause, okay? How does it smell? What kind of salty? Like the bay itself. And then that's the end of the first clause. First, you have the subject, shop, and then you have the verb, smells, and then you have a new subject, creaky oak floor, with a new verb, okay? And because you have this word and, right, what does that tell you? That really confirms that this is its own independent clause. The shop smells salty like the bay itself. And then the creaky oak floor is the second independent clause. So you have one, you have two. They're two basically separate related sentences. And in cases like this, obviously, your choices are semicolon, period, and then comma, conjunction. Well, there's a conjunction where where's the comma? The comma needs to come at the end, so it's not there. So these are the ways we have to fix it. Let's look at how we can fix this. Let's look at the options available. A doesn't work for the reason we just covered. B works because it has that comma after the end, followed by the word and, right? So it separates the two independent clauses, the two independent sentences. The problem is you don't need a comma to separate bay from the reflexive pronoun itself, which just serves to emphasize the bay. What about C, bay itself? That certainly does it. It has that comma, which you need, and it doesn't have any unnecessary punctuation. And then you have bay itself. Well, this would basically cause this to be essentially a run-on sentence. Not as bad as others because it has the word and there, but you do need that comma because this is a completely new subject and a completely new verb, okay? All right, on to question 22. 22 says, I turn on the lights in the middle of the shop, sits wooden bins filled with sinkers, floats, and lures. Okay, the problem with this is that when you read it, it sort of sounds like one sentence is kind of blurring into another, and that's certainly the case because you have a subject verb and then another subject verb, sits wooden bins. Now, this is maybe hard to spot because it's an inverted sentence, meaning it's a passive voice sentence where the verb comes before the subject. But if you just think about it, you can say, whoa, well, what's sitting? The wooden bins are sitting, the wooden bins sit. So if you just think, what is the verb doing? Or what is sitting? who is doing the verb, and you can identify it, then you can sort of figure out where the subject is and where the verb is. But you have two independent clauses, not separated or indicated that they are independent clauses, with the proper punctuation and or conjunction, which you need. And so that is the first main problem. The other, which is sort of related, is that you basically just have a series of prepositional phrases on the lights in the middle of the shop. And it's sort of hard to tell where the first clause ends and where the next clause begins, and you just have to think it through. Because what did they probably turn on? Turn on the lights. You could say turn on the lights in the middle of the shop, but what about what sits in the middle? Where do the wooden bins sit? It would have to say the wooden bins sit in the middle of the shop. So when you logically think about it, you realize that here is where that first sentence ends and the next one begins. So we need to find some kind of proper separation. Let's see if we get it. F is no change. That doesn't work. What about G? Lights, period, in the middle. That perfectly does it. It separates the independent clauses. I turn on the lights, period, in the middle of the shop sits wooden bins filled with sinkers, floats, and lures. So G works. What about H? H, lights, in the center. Okay, well, they changed middle with center. There's no problem there. The problem is that you have this comma, and then you would need a conjunction to separate the two independent clauses. That doesn't do it at all. And then if you look at J, all J does is replace middle with center. They just replace two synonyms. And this, again, this doesn't have a period. This doesn't have a period or a comma and an and. It just says, let's just forget everything and see if we could switch middle and center and trick some students. And that doesn't work either. So the only answer choice that grammatically works is G. What about 23? All right, same sentence. Of the shop sits wooden bins. Okay. If you didn't pick this up before, you can just pick it up now. What's the subject? Was what's sitting? What is doing the sitting? The wooden bins. Is wooden bins plural or singular? Well, it's singular. It's plural, right? Plural. And sits is singular or plural? Well, in this case, sits is singular. So there is a noun, verb, or subject-verb disagreement. You need to change the word sits to the plural form, so it would be sit. Sit obviously works. Sets is different because sets is how if you set something down, okay? Versus something that's just there. Okay, so that wouldn't work. And is sitting wouldn't work just because it's not consistent with the rest of what's going on. If you look at the previous clauses, it's all present tense. So just keep it as present tense. This sits there, okay, or this sit there. Wooden bins sit there. Moreover, the more obvious mistake with this is that wooden bins is still plural. This would need to be are, but again, just to keep everything in the consistent tone, it would be better to just use the word sit. 24, given that all of the choices are true, which one provides the most specific information about merchandise that can be found in the shop? All right, 24. It says the wide variety of fishing equipment attracts both the serious angler and the casual vacationer. So does it talk about the merchandise that can be found in the shop? Yeah. Is it the most specific? Well, let's see if there's something more specific than what they had. G, a rack of fishing rods covers one wall. Shelves of reels, hooks, nets, and a fishing line fill another. Well, that's about as specific as you could get in one sentence, right? It says specifically what's there. What about the dark wood-paneled walls are jam-packed with equipment that would thrill any fishing enthusiast? Okay, that's definitely not as specific as this. It just says, oh, there's a lot of equipment similar to what's here. It just says it's there. It doesn't say specifically. And then J, the shop offers gear for a range of different purposes. That's even more vague and less specific. So the most specific one is G. 25. If I notice any merchandise out of place, I straighten it up. This is perfectly fine. Everything is in the present tense. And then it says, if I notice any merchandise out of place, I do this. You have a subject verb, no modifier problems. Everything seems fine. And maybe one thing that some people might look for is it. Well, what's it referring to? Merchandise. Merchandise is singular, so the pronoun it has a proper antecedent, merchandise. So there's pronoun agreement, antecedent agreement, no problems. What about straighten them? Well, it should be straighten it because merchandise is singular. What about straighten those? Same thing. And then straighten them. Obviously, you have these pronoun problems. And then here you also have past tense when everything else is in the present tense. Okay? If I notice anything, I do this. It shouldn't be if I notice, I did this. That wouldn't work. So you have a verb tense issue and then you have a pronoun antecedent issue. So that's why A is the correct answer, no change. If you say 26 says, next I turn on the electric urn to heat water for hot tea and I start a fresh pot of coffee. When I fill the bowl of sugar cubes, take the lid off the powdered creamer and add bags of tea, okay, to the assortment in the basket on the counter. Well, you basically have this subordinate clause, this dependent clause, when I do this, right? Well, when you do this, you fill this, you take the lid off that, you do this. Yeah, so what? When you do this, what? It's a subordinate clause, it's a dependent clause. It needs to go with an actual subject and verb. There is no subject and verb in this case, okay? So when you do this, what? There's nothing. And this is certainly an issue where there's proper parallelism. I fill, take, and add, okay? The verbs are consistent with each other the way they're presented. They're occurring, you could say like in math, parallel lines where the structure, I fill the bowl, take the lid, add tea bags, that's fine. And the present tense is fine, consistent with everything else. It really is just the fact that this is a subordinate or a dependent clause. There's no subject or verb. So you could say, as I fill, you have that same problem where you start the sentence with as. It's a subordinating word that makes the whole sentence just a basically dependent clause with no subject and verb. As you fill what? As you fill what? Well, what about filling? Same thing. It's a present participle form of fill, so it's not a verb itself, but even if it was a verb itself, it wouldn't have a subject. And then it would also have a parallelism clash, right? Filling the bowl and then take, is take in the similar form as filling? Are they both present participles? Are they both present tense? No. So filling wouldn't work either. What about I fill? Sure. I, the noun, fill the verb. I fill the bowl. And then that same subject gets used for each of these, each aspect of this list. I fill the bowls, I take the lid off, I add the tea bags. Okay? And you could say, oh, well, isn't this a new independent clause because there's a comma in the word and? No, because this is a list. When there's a list of 3 or more items, the last item can have a comma after, before the final and. It doesn't have to have a comma, actually. It can be either or. So in this case, I fill would be the correct choice that completes the sentence. 27. All right, it says, I make sure the buckets of live herring, mullet, and shrimp are filled. I think the only way this is really confusing is if you don't know what herring or mullet are. They are types of fish, and if you don't know that for whatever reasons, like your English isn't perfect, that's I would think that's not too uncommon. I'm learning Korean, and I don't know a lot of names for fish, actually, like specific names. I make sure the buckets of live herring. Live is not a fish, okay? Live means they're alive. Herring is a type of fish, like salmon. Mullet is a type of fish. So it's saying herring, mullet, and shrimp. It's a list of 3 things are filled. there is nothing wrong here. You don't need a comma after live because that adjective is describing all of these 3 nouns, okay? So A would seem to be like it would be fine. What about B? Obviously, live is not part of the list. Live just describes the components of the list. What about C? Live, herring, mullet. Same problem here, and it does. And you could say, well, shouldn't this have a comma here after mullet? No, you don't actually need a comma there. The last part of the list, that comma could be there, or it doesn't have to be. It's optional. So the only problem is this again. And what about D? Live, herring, mullet. Well, this is a problem because herring is part of that list. And if you don't have a comma, even if this wasn't part of the list, why would you have a comma after mullet when the list is only 2? When you only have a list of 2 things, there's no comma needed. Like saying, I like apples and oranges. No comma needed after apples, okay? Because it's only a list of 2. Commas are needed after a list of 3 or more, okay? So A is the correct answer, no change. 28, for the sake of logic and coherence of this paragraph, sentence 5 should be placed. Okay, let's look at this. Where is sentence 5? I pull out a large cardboard flat of worms packed in moist grass. So what are our options? 1, 2, and 3 after, okay. Then from the walk-in cooler, I drag bushels of bait clams to the counter. And then if you say I pull out a large cardboard flat of worms packed in moist grass, that could work after sentence 1, but what about sentence 2? And then sentence 2, it starts talking about what? Buckets of live herring, mullet, and shrimp are filled. Well, it's talking about worms, and then it talks about fish, right? And then it says in sentence 3, since they're sold by the baker's dozen, I fill styrofoam containers with a bit of grass and the 13 worms. So this doesn't make sense after 1, and mainly because worms is talked about here, so it should be around sentence 3, okay? Otherwise you basically have a situation where they're talking about worms and then they talk about something else and then they talk about worms again. You want to make sure things are grouped together logically. So it wouldn't be after sentence 1. What about after sentence 2? I make sure the buckets of live herring, mullet, and shrimp are filled. And then it says, I might prepare extra, and then it says, I pull out a large cardboard flat of worms packed in moist grass. Could it be after sentence 2? Since they're sold by the baker's dozen, I fill styrofoam. Yeah, okay. I actually think this could be after sentence 2. Why? Because what does sentence 3 say? It says there, right? Well, if you don't have sentence 5 before there, where there would be referring to worms, which it is because it talks about the 13 worms, then this there, you don't know what it's talking about. This there seems to be a pronoun that replaces herring, mullet, and shrimp, but is that what it's saying? No. What is there? They're the 13 worms. Also, yeah, I mean that's basically it. But if you have it after sentence 3, yes, the ideas of worms are grouped together, but you do have this pronoun that doesn't have a proper antecedent, where in this case the antecedent is herring, mullet, and shrimp, and so that's improper. That's wrong. Okay. So sentence 5 should be after sentence 2, not after sentence 3, and not after sentence 1. That's the worst choice. So H is the correct answer. All right, 29, it says, if the writer were to delete the phrase with a smile from the preceding sentence, the sentence would primarily lose. Well, by this time it's nearly 6 o'clock. I open the window blinds, unlock the front door, and greet the first customers with a smile. Well, I guess it shows how, courteous he is and how he is welcoming. All right, information that contrasts the narrator's mood with that of the customers. Is he saying, I'm smiling, and is the purpose to show that I'm in a good mood, but the customers are grumpy? No, that's not the purpose. There's no indication that the customers are grumpy, but that certainly doesn't seem to be the purpose. It seems to be more emphasizing what he's doing, not what the customers are doing. B, a detail that describes the narrator's attitude toward the customers. Sure, it describes what he's doing. His attitude, how he's like cheerful, right, at the start of the day. So B seems to work. What about C, a description that refers to a point made in the preceding paragraph? Was there anything in the preceding paragraph about, greeting customers with a smile? No, because he was talking about the bait and the fish. That didn't have to do with smiling or his mood or the customers. And what about nothing at all, since this detail is clearly stated elsewhere in this paragraph? Is it? No, there's no smiling anywhere. It just says offers complimentary cup of coffee or tea to help them, so he's generally helpful, but it doesn't say he greets them with a smile. So the only answer choice that makes sense is B, a detail that describes the narrator's attitude toward the customers. And then 30, upon reviewing the essay and realizing that some key information has been left out, oh my God, the writer composes the following sentence incorporating that information. I work at Stoney's Bait and Tackle Shop. This sentence would most logically be placed after the last sentence in paragraph 1, 2, 3, or 4. All right. Paragraph 1. Well, thankfully, these paragraphs are short. Most folks who live around a little bayside village work at a job having something to do with fishing or tourism, and I'm no different. I work at Stoney's Bait and Tackle Shop. That seems to make sense. It's like saying, oh, everyone works in, fishing, tourism type stuff, and I work at the fish shop. That perfectly makes sense there. And it sets up the rest of the passage because what is that? It's basically like a thesis statement. Like, I work here, and then the whole passage talks about what his experience is like working there. What about after paragraph 2? It's about how he sets up in the morning and how, the seagulls look like this, the sun looks like that. Does the description of the area and the scenery fit with I work here? No, one is about scenery and one is about just listing where he works. What about 3? Usually as I'm opening the door, the night security guard comes in, and would it come after paragraph 3 about I work here, and then when this paragraph is basically just about how he opens the door and greets somebody specifically? No. Obviously, it's part of working there, but this paragraph specifically is about greeting someone and opening the door for them. Okay? And the security guard. And then this one, paragraph 4, is about what? The fishing equipment, the bins and the turning on the lights, and he straightened things up. That has to do with part of working there, but this paragraph is specifically focused on a description of what they offer and the way the place looks inside. Okay? So 1 would certainly be the answer choice that makes sense, where it says everyone in this village works in fishing or tourism, and I work at the fish store, or I work at the this stop, at one of these types of things. 2. So F would be the correct answer. Good job. You just finished passage 2, test 4 for the English ACT, and whenever you're ready, just move on to passage 3.